Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Finding Financial Fitness Show. I'm your host, Nino Gonzalez, joined again by my co-host, Chen. Welcome back to the show.
Hey,
I don't know why I keep
everybody.
introducing our names. I feel like people should know us by now. We're episode like 45, whatever. So
Well, just in case this is the
yeah,
first
it's your
episode.
first one. Yeah, if this is your first episode, welcome. And this probably will be if this is your first episode, you're probably gonna be like, whoa, where's this all coming from? So maybe go back to a few different ones. But no, welcome. If this is your first episode, welcome. We're glad to have you here. And I think that today's episode will be fun, talking about a different angle, a different side of the investment world, right? Again, we try to stress multiple times, not just investments that we're doing, not just people that we know that are investing, not just different ways to become healthy and not healthy, but what it all means. And under the umbrella of course, living a happy life and a fulfilled life. And with that comes one of the principles of Nelson Nash that Pei you always talk about. I think it's probably your favorite one because you always talk about it. Rethinking your thinking. And I think when you initially come into this world, you have to rethink your thinking. But I think that people leave it there. That at that point, once you've rethought your thinking, going from 401k, from savings to passive income stacking to lines of credit to all in ones, that's the first shift, but that's not the last. And I think when I read the book at first and I was like, yeah, rethink your thinking. It's like, okay, well, now I rethought my thinking. I'm good. My thinking's good. But part of it in what I've learned from you is learning how to continue to embody that. So let me ask you this. How frequently would you feel like you're either intentionally or unintentionally rethinking your thinking?
I would like to say constantly, but that would be a lie.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't. You people could be like, okay, then you're just being fickle. Then you can't make up your mind. You're being indecisive.
Yeah.
There's a difference. There's a different level, right? It's one thing to have doubts, like, okay, I'm not sure what I'm doing. It's another that you understand the path that you're on. You're certain that this is how you're going to, you know, kind of this is a course that you want to stay on. And
Yep.
then as you are working through all that, um, I compare it to like a buffet, right? You come in, this is your first time at an investment buffet, and there are all these opportunities and things that are you've never heard of, right? And already I think the segment of population of these people um are the three people who are willing to try new things, right? So you're already
Sure.
kind of separated yourself from the crowd, right? You're a little bit of a risk taker. You're willing to try new things, and then now you're at this brand new investment buffet, and you're just like, oh my god, everything looks good,
Mm.
right? You want to try everything. So my point of like when I say rethink your thinking is more about like becoming more mindful of if what you're doing or what you're picking up on is fitting your end goal. Like your vision has to be there. And we talk about purpose a lot, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but that's what I'm talking about. Rethinking your thinking and then adjusting your actions as you go.
Well, and I think a good part of that is there's two ways you can rethink your thinking. You can be intentional and almost set a point once a month, once a week, you once a quarter, whatever you want to do, to force yourself to rethink your thinking. I think that naturally, as we talked about stacking and making passive income that way, typically once you start a new stack, you kind of want to rethink your thinking because you want to reevaluate where you're at. Ideally, that's what you should do. But remember, in our stacks, we're talking 4 or 5 months that each stack takes, which means you would do 3 check-ins every year, which I think is good. But I think being more proactive isn't necessarily a bad thing. I will say though, know your personality, because if you keep asking yourself to rethink your thinking and your internal self is then starting to interpret that as you're questioning yourself, that could be very bad, because then you could just live in this anxiety bubble where you're just never confident in what you're doing. When we talk about rethink your thinking, we're talking about essentially redoing your 2024, 2025 New Year's resolutions, do you and we're recording this in October, does the you in October still align with the you in January? And there's nothing wrong with if you don't, if you've changed. But asking yourself that question intentionally is a good way to start. But there's also the flip side to that, which is the events that come up where you realize, oh, my thinking was a little bit flawed. I thought I was stable. I thought I was secure in this thinking, and then bam, something comes up and you realize, whoa, maybe it's not as stable as I thought. Maybe I need to shift my perspective. And this is just fresh on my mind because I experienced this just not too long ago. Just brief example was taxes. So my tax bill was higher than I thought I had expected. So I strategic like me last year and you last year, we talked about all these ways. How can we not stop paying our taxes, but defer paying our taxes, right? Most people don't know this. Again, this is not legal or financial advice, but you can withhold your W-2 taxes. You can say, hey, don't take out the full 16%, only take out 9 or 10, knowing that you're going to pay it at the end of the year in the large sum. And then in the meantime, you could use that money to go towards your stacking. But if you're not careful with it, and then you're not expecting the big tax bill, or you forget about the big tax bill at the end of the year, that can really eat into your cash flow. So I'm not saying that's exactly what happened to me, but something along those lines did. And it made me realize, wait, hold on. How am I going to cover this? Now, granted, everything's good. I'm grateful for everything that I'm able to move things around. But it then had me going back to the whiteboard, right? Okay.
Yeah.
What is my current plan? My current plan is this. Based on my current plan, what's my current trajectory? And that's where I think it's so important to have short-term and long-term goals. Map it out for 3 months and then map it out for 5 years and see how that works. And then try to point out the flaws. Don't be pessimistic, but try to point out where can things become derailed and prevent that and try to jump on top of that. And as you get there and as you continue to do this, well, then ask yourself the question, do I want the same things that I wanted a couple months ago or a year ago? And if so, asking yourself, why do I want what I want? And there's nothing wrong with changing your mind. That's, to me, that's part of maturing. That's part of evolving. That's all what this is for, right?
And, part of what we have, which I am feeling very blessed that I do have this ability, or people actually do ask me, or reach out directly and ask me sometimes like, hey, what do you think about this? Right. So in a sense, I'm mentoring people, but not like I don't charge people or anything like that, but it's just like something that I enjoy doing. And I take those opportunity to rethink my thinking. Okay. Because by sharing, hey, I think you should do this based on what information you are willing to share with me, it gives me a chance to process like, wait, so if I was in this same situation, this is what I would do, then how come I'm actually not doing this? Why am I not following my own advice, right? If I'm telling someone like, hey, I think you're over leveraged and you should, clean up your debts a little bit, then that kind of gives me the impetus or like the kick to say like, hey, maybe I should look at my own leverage and like see if I'm proportionate. Like, am I balanced? Right? Because it's so easy to just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to just no, don't worry about it. Right? The future income is gonna take care of the current problem. And we fall into that very easily.
It's hard not to.
Right, because I think in general we are optimistic people,
and we believe in the product and we believe in the process, right?
So we're optimistic, but then we forget that we have to live today, and tax bill and whatnot comes. And if we're not readjusting and pivoting, then we could potentially create a bigger problem for ourselves down the road. So I don't constantly or every day rethink. I think you were right. That is a lot of anxiety, and I don't even think it's helpful, right? I think that would make people have the tendency to rage quit and just be like,
think so.
This way too much. I can't handle it. Let me get back to trusting my employer's 401k and trusting the social security system that they're going to take care of me. Like people will retreat back into their shell.
Well,
which is
it's
what we
called
don't want.
regression to the mean.
Right.
And that's I'm going to go back to weight training here because that's what happens. So oftentimes, I mentioned this on a previous episode about our weight baseline. If you try to push your weight, let's say you're trying to gain muscle, or let's say you're trying to lose weight, and your normal weight is 150, that's the weight you kind of go back to. If you're not, like, let's say you gain muscle and you get to 160 pounds, or you lose weight and you get down to 140, if you don't do the same behaviors and the same mechanics and you kind of just fall back into the routine, you're going to regress to the mean. That's naturally what happens. It's the same thing with behaviors until you've really incorporated those behaviors that have gotten to your life. I'm going to plug a book here, Atomic Habits by James Clear here. Very, very good book because it talks about how long it takes to build a routine, how long it takes to fully get entrenched into it. But if you don't have those routines down, what ends up happening is you just revert back to what you know because you go back to what's comfortable. Nothing wrong with that, but you need to be proactive about that. So I fully agree with you on that.
Yeah. And, it's another saying that I love to say, which I, stole from Nelson Nash, is that a luxury enjoyed becomes a necessity, right? And we all have the same, you know, we all do the same thing, right? Once you have something that you work hard to obtain and you have it in your possession, it's hard to let it go, right? I'm not going to go back to buying a car that doesn't have air conditioning. That's just not happening.
I was listening, it's funny. I was listening to one of your comments on one of the shows we did. You used that same example, and you were like, "Yeah, I'm not going to go back to a car without air conditioning." Look, we're recording this in 2024. If your car does not have air conditioning, we have a problem. Something's wrong. It's time to trade in that 1969 Buick. I promise you there's plenty of
Oh,
cars.
actually, no. There are some antique cars,
Well, that's
exotic
different.
antique cars that
Absolutely. That's different. I'm talking about like a new car.
yeah.
But that doesn't, I'm not belittling the point. The point is that you're correct. And I think when people first got AC in their cars, I remember my father-in-law talking about that was the luxurious thing. Power windows were a very luxurious thing. And it was, I don't need all that fancy stuff because that added cost. Well, then it became kind of embodied in the car. And now you can't find a car without it, even if you want to. And it's the same. You're right. A luxury once enjoyed. And I think the point that I wanted to get to with this also is emotional attachment to things. So you and I talked, we had a really good conversation over the weekend about becoming emotionally attached to things versus becoming emotionally attached to experiences. And there's nothing wrong with being proud of something that you worked for, right? If your go-to thing is a car, if your go-to thing is shoes or bag, whatever it is, if that for you makes you feel like I've accomplished a lot, and it gives you kind of not a purpose, but it gives you a sense of drive. I think that could be very beneficial because it can keep you working and keep you motivated. Absolutely, you can reward that. The problem then becomes if you become emotionally invested in that and your identity becomes wrapped up in that, as opposed to if your identity is emotionally wrapped into good relationships with your friends, experiences, traveling. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And I think that if you had to give one up, if push comes to shove, and I think it's one thing to say it to yourself, it's one thing to have to experience it, right? So you never really have to show those colors until you're really tested. So keep that in mind. And when you get emotionally attached to something, it makes it very hard to let go. But if you see it rationally, you can distance yourself, compartmentalize your emotions versus what's rational, then you can make a strategic decision. And again, there's nothing wrong with your goals changing and getting to a point where you feel like, okay, now I'm at this position where maybe investments didn't work out the way that I thought. Maybe we had a health problem that caused a lot of money. Maybe I wanted to donate to this charity and I really wanted to do it. So I put a lot of money into it. And what you got over here, the material possessions, maybe you feel like, hey, I need to get rid of them, or I need to part ways with them, or knowing that you're eventually going to go back to it. It's a temporary thing. And then you rebuild, you re-strategize. And that's the beauty of what we talked about in the velocity banking episodes, is that this works at all structures. Adding a zero, subtracting a zero, adding two zeros, subtracting two zeros. It gives you flexibility that if something happens, you can pivot, you can move away, and then you can restart and re-go. Versus if you're in the accumulation mindset, and let's say your portfolio is doing well, right? Your stock portfolio, you take X amount of $1,000 out of your portfolio to buy a doodad because you really want that for yourself. And then your portfolio crashes. And now this doodad's not worth, you lose 50% on it, let's say. Well, now you can't rebuild this because you've lost all of it. It's one thing to lose it in a accumulation model. When you're doing it in the velocity banking model, the losses you can really, really push away the losses as much as possible and minimize them because you have all these stacks going on and you have the strategy behind it. So that really does help.
You can scale down, right?
Correct.
In the velocity
Correct.
model, we gave an example of leveraging $10,000, right? If something goes wrong and the cash flow is not coming back as expected, I can scale down and say, okay, I'm going to leverage 5,000 this time instead of 10,000, right? This is what we're talking about, that whole rethinking your thinking concept, or the idea of doing that, because it could sound fairly like formulaic of what we do, but ultimately how we think, how we plan out, how we adjust to external factors affects how we then make the next move. It's almost like playing 3D chess. It's not just like move this piece over here and the next piece. It's not mechanical.
No, one piece moves fluid, and that involves all of the other pieces.
Right.
Well, and you mentioned, again, velocity banking episode 17 and 30, where we started getting to the breakdown of the PowerPoints. You mentioned you don't have to stop working, right? Like if you love your job, you don't need to stop working. But let's say, as an example, you get your stack size to 40K. And at that point, you realize, I'm done. I don't want to work anymore. I have enough coming in. And you step back from your job. But then that decreases your monthly cash flow, like your contribution, your input, by $5,000. So now you're only able to contribute $5,000 every single month to your stack size. Well, what do? You can pivot from a 40K stack size to a 25K stack size. Okay, well, then you might be thinking, but then I'm slowing myself down and I'm slowing down the growth. And this is true on an argument level of mathematics, you are slowing down. But what did you just gain? You're officially job optional. You officially left your job. You're not working anymore. So are you stopping to stack? Of course not. You're just pivoting. You're just slowing it down. But what's the alternative? The alternative is stay at your job that you hate, stay at 40K stacks, grow and grow and grow. And then in 3 years' time, maybe your stack is 80K. And now you still hate your job and you realize, and you think, man, you're always going to have that argument, because the argument will always be there. No matter what you do, if you reduce the input, you're going to reduce the stack size. So it's a simple as. So if you can make it work, and we just had Iris Olivas on the show talking about this, where for her, it was more important to stop working than it was to, and now she's going to rebuild and kind of redevelop that stack. But now she's job optional, and she ended up going back to work because she wanted to, right? It's a whole, if anything, even if you stop working for a month and you get a taste of it, there's something to be said about when you have that element of control and you realize nobody has control over my life other than me. That's very, very empowering. And if that means reducing your stack size, for a couple of months in order to experience that, you need to keep in mind, some people never experience that in their lives, because by the time they get to the age of retirement at 65, and at that point their quality of life is diminished, well, then they never get to fully experience that control. So understand what you're gaining here, and don't take it as a setback, or I lost, or I failed, or it's just a pivot. That's all it is. It's a step back pivot, and you're going from this side to this side, and it'll all work itself out.
Yeah. And it's the freedom it offers, priceless.
Yeah. And again, I would rather, because what was once a luxury that soon becomes a necessity, that applies to both time freedom and material things. So if you have to choose between your time freedom and your material things, If that decision to you becomes clouded at any point, you need to rethink your thinking, because time freedom, that's what we're doing all this for. If you're coming again, if you're coming into this, you might at first be thinking, I want to have material things. And there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe that's what gets you in. Maybe that's what motivates you to get started. But if you don't fall in love with the process, you will never be happy and you will never be successful and you will quit because you're not trusting the process. It's the same thing of like the climb, right? The journey is the destination. I know I'm throwing in all these cliches, but as I've gotten more and more deeper in all this, I realized, damn, these cliches are actually kind of true. And the more you can understand them, the more you realize, okay, all right, I get it.
It's like dieting, honestly,
How so?
because if you I personally experienced this, I'm guilty. When I notice that whenever my focus is just on the numbers, like, hey, I need to lose 20 weight for this wedding that I'm going to, or whatever, when it's like that, so it's
Mhm.
like more material based, right?
Okay.
Then I reach that goal, and then I let go, and I go back to my old way of life.
Mm.
But the one time that I actually kept my weight off was because of a health scare. And because that was more of a, it's not something that I put a number to it. It's just I need to get healthier. I need to get off some certain meds. I need to live. That gave me the motivation to stay on the healthier track for longer. So
So
there's a parallel here. The motivation piece, whatever is motivating you, it has to be, I don't want to say like life and death, but you have to want it like you want air
yep.
for it to stick.
So you're talking about, and so I was taking a note right now, superficial versus intrinsic motivators. So external versus intrinsic. And you are thinking on that level of fitness and finance. So what you said is that when you did it, when you lost the weight for doing it strictly for the number, for a superficial moment of living or fitting in a dress or doing something, it was not as lasting and as meaningful as it was when you did it because of a health scare. Well, why did you do it because of the health scare? Because it was an intrinsic motivator that made you realize, hold on, I don't want to be off this planet. I want to live more and I want to have a better quality of life. That is intrinsic. Now, maybe it was an extrinsic, a person told you whatever, but it came from within. And that allowed you to stay the course for the right reasons. And it goes back to what's your why? What's your motivation behind it? And something that something I've been really fascinated about is you can use negative energy to motivate you for so long, but
Mm.
you cannot David Goggins and Jocko your way to the end of your life. And if you don't know who these people are, they're very disciplined, like don't be a little baby, like stop complaining, work hard, no sleep, like sacrifice, sacrifice, sacrifice. I think there's a subset of the population that needs to hear that message by all means, that need to, the type B personalities that need to get off their butt and work. Absolutely. But most people listening to this and most people that get into the alternative investing world, I would fancy that they're type A personalities. And their problem isn't necessarily with having to work more, it's actually having to work less, right? Because they are so intrinsically motivated because their why is so strong. How do you then turn that off? How do you then get to a point where you achieve one of your accomplishments and then and then you feel like, all right, I'm good. I'm gonna stop it now. And that's crazy. Like it's so difficult and it's so challenging. So I think writing down on a whiteboard or a piece of paper what your reasons are for doing this, don't judge them. Do not judge them. Just write them down, circle them, and then label them. Okay, that's extrinsic, that's intrinsic, that's extrinsic, that's intrinsic, and just tally them up. And I would say focus on those intrinsic motivators to propel you into into your journey.
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. Like I only just done goal boards and whatnot. But I think going into 2025, I've already started my extrinsic. How do you even say this word? External. I've started my external goal sheet. But I think the next step to make it to attach feeling to it, this is part of the goal setting technique, is you have to attach feeling to it. How would that make me feel if I were to achieve, you know, $20,000 of passive income per month? What does that mean? Because a number is just a number, it has no
Yep.
meaning.
Yep.
But what does that translate to? I think that's something. And I think it'll be fun to do it as a group.
How so? Like with just like a people and everyone just like shares their.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because in that sense, I
I think
get
people will
it.
be intimidated.
You think? I think it'll be fun.
Of course you
It's not
would. I
like
mean, you're a very social, personable person,
I think
obviously.
it would be like good to have people question, okay, why does that matter to you? Because it's one thing that you personally ask yourself and you're like, oh yeah, you could easily justify like, oh yeah, of
Of
course I
course.
want that vacation in Europe.
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
Right.
But you have someone says like, oh, okay, well, how does that translate into a better quality of life for you? Then
Hmm.
you really have to think about it.
Can you answer that question? I can, and I
The
will after you. That like going to Europe question. Like, how does going to Europe improve your quality of life? In your case, I can answer if you want me to go first. I just put you on the spot.
well, for me, it's about the ability to disconnect because I have problem disconnecting. And when I go to Europe, sometimes I purposely choose not to buy Wi-Fi pack
Mm,
because I have no choice. I can't not get online unless I'm at a cafe or at a hotel with Wi-Fi. Then it
mm,
makes me more present in my life. Otherwise, in the US, I can jump on even if there's no Wi-Fi, I can jump on, my cellular service that
sure, sure.
I can be in a museum, but I'm not looking at anything. I'm looking at my phone.
Or at a concert or
That's my
somewhere.
personality. You know what I mean? That's my personality. So yeah, I like to go to shows and stuff because you're forced to shut off your phone.
I agree. Well, I don't think you. I don't. I think some people would listening would probably think you don't need to go halfway around the world to experience that. I think you can forcefully not take your phone somewhere, and that's where I think I'm a big proponent of macro and micro things. So I think go to Europe once a year or once a month, depending on your lifestyle or your schedule. But you can. That's a macro like experience. But do like micro experiences. Go on a 30-minute walk without your phone. Do a 20-minute meditation, do a 10-minute, just sit there and do nothing, read. Like those things you can do on a smaller level day to day. But on a bigger level, by all means, I fully agree with you. And going to my answer, so at first, I'll be honest, I originally going to like traveling these last couple of years, I was like, I want to disconnect. And then I get there and it's hard because it's the to me it's the exact same thing as extreme dieting. It's the okay, I'm eating 4,000 calories of junk food, and starting Monday morning I'm going to eat 1,500 calories and only eat salads. Well, what's going to happen? You might be good for a couple of meals, but you're bound to regress because you're doing such drastic changes there you can't stick to them. So that's how I initially started off. Then I realized, okay, I want to, maybe it's better to just limit per day how much I'm on. So what I personally do is just the thing that I like to share with people. On the iPhone, if you have an iPhone, there's a thing called screen time that you can measure how much time you spend on your screen. Before you use this, understand your mind will be blown of how much you use your phone. So there's a thing called screen time in the health app on your iPhone, and you can check how much time you spend on your screen each day, and it'll categorize everything. You spend X amount on text messages, X amount on Instagram, X amount on Facebook, and then it'll macro categorize it into social media, productivity, finance, whatever it is. So what I started doing is I start using that, and the moment that I open up on my home screen, the only thing that's on my home screen is this big old image of in real time what my screen time is, as a reminder that, remember, like Why are you opening up your phone? So I initially did this when I was in Europe because I'm thinking there's no way I can spend just as much time in Europe on my phone as I am at home. That would be absurd. And some days it was the case. Now, some days, and you have to be real with yourself. Like for me, I love like researching, okay, where are we going to go eat? Where are we going to go? Like what museums are we going to visit? That's different. That's different. Like it's about your experience. But I'm talking about like being on social media, looking at being jealous of other people on their trips while you are on your trip. Like let's be real. So for me, it was about minimizing it a little bit and then eventually having certain days where maybe you don't bring your phone out and about. Like if you're going on when we went to Rome to go see the Colosseum, like that's pretty much an all day thing. Why do I need my phone? I had it with me, but it was because of my restaurants. But when I'm at the Colosseum, one of my favorite the visits that I ever did was St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, where you have to go see the Sistine Chapel. There's no phones. You can't bring your phones at all in there. You can't take pictures of the Sistine Chapel. So it forces you to be in that moment. And I'll never forget that. Those 40 minutes that we were at the Sistine Chapel sitting there, like there's no way to not be in awe. Like I still get goosebumps thinking about that. And that's really pleasurable. So for me, going back to the original question, a big part of the reason why I love traveling so much is it shows me that there's so much more to this world. And I get to experience a whole different lifestyle. I'm blessed to be able to travel with my wife and my father-in-law, like people that I would consider my best friends. We get to fly business class because of points and miles. Like that on its own is a fantastic experience. And then being in a different country, in a different part of the world, different cuisines, like trying to get myself immersed into it, eating at hole in the walls, it just allows me to see that there's a way of life that people that I'm constantly surround myself with, don't know about. And I get to be there, and it forces me to rethink my thinking, because I'm thinking, hold on. And I mentioned this in the Japan episode. These people are living this way. And to the naked eye, as an American, it's like, well, these people don't look too happy. But then they have less than you do, but they're happier. And so it makes you ask the questions. And to me, that's emotionally challenging in a good way. You want to do challenging things in life that makes you develop and grow. So traveling allows me to do that. And it forces me, and I'm bringing it back to what we're talking about, it forces me to rethink my thinking. I have to rethink my thinking. And then I go there, then I come back and I realize the things I was stressed about here, in the grand scheme of it, it's not
a big deal.
don't take
And
yourself so
that is
seriously.
why, but that is why I said it's good to do these like with other people, right?
That's
Because
true.
had we not had this conversation, I would have thought that, yeah, I could figure it out already,
Yeah.
right? But because I put it out there, then you're like, wait a second. Let
I need to
me
answer that.
challenge you. Let me challenge you on your thinking, which is I welcome that. I love it. Um, it helps me grow. And one of the things that this is kind of weird. I like to go to a country and get lost in a sense of like that adrenaline rush of I don't understand the
You're a
language.
masochist.
Maybe I can't figure out the map. I don't speak the language, and this makes me feel alive. And I'm not on autopilot.
Yeah.
Sometimes I drive around my neighborhood. I don't even, I'm like, wait, what was I doing? Like,
Yeah. Yep. I know you're talking exactly what you're talking about.
mhm. But when you're in a foreign country, you have to be on high alert. You have to be hyper vigilant. And that is for me a rush. And I cannot get it anywhere else.
That's fair. That's that's a little extreme, but
I
but
like to
that's
torture
fair.
myself.
To make me feel alive.
I have to clutch my wallet.
Stop it. Stop it. We're gonna get flagged on YouTube. I get your point though. I think that when you're in those positions, like I'm a big person on control. Like I love to have control of my life, of everything, of every moment of in my life. And so sometimes just letting go of that control, at first it's super challenging. Like I'm not gonna lie, I struggle with it. But at the end of it, you kind of, as you get through that, you realize that you're more malleable and adaptable, than you thought you originally were. And I think that that is very important. I keep bringing up my father-in-law, but I think it's such a good example. So he was like me, I think, throughout his whole working life, where everything was structured. Like wake up at this time, leave to work at this time, lunch at this time, blah blah blah. And so now when he travels with us, he's just sitting in the back seat, and like there's times we give him a hard time. We'll be at like TSA, and they're like, "Sir, what country are you visiting?" And he'll turn to my wife, "Where are we going?" It's that level of like just releasing all control, knowing you're in good hands. Like that's to me, that's aspirational because that's so like there's clarity, there's calm, there's peace in that way of life. And you can't, of course, you can't have that through some people do like through their whole lives. And I understand like there's certain times and places for it. I completely understand. But there's something to be said about just putting yourself in a position, whether it's intentional or not intentional, where you're forced to adapt and how you overcome that.
Oh yeah. Just look at my last trip to Europe.
Oh yeah,
Lost
talk about
my
it. You didn't tell
passport.
us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I lost my
share that story a
passport
little bit.
and I was supposed to go to Spain, and on the airplane I put my passport in the front pocket. Note to yourself, don't do what I did. And I walk off the airplane without my passport. And then when we were at the about to connect to the new flight, found out like empty all like that was a adrenaline talk about adrenaline rush. My flight's about to leave. I don't have my passport. Where is it? I got my husband and my child with me, just like staring at me like, what are you doing? But listen, we ended up having a great time in London in
Didn't
our
it
shorts
rain the
and
whole time?
t-shirts. It was freezing cold the whole time. We
My
was
God.
prepared to go to Spain in 80-degree weather. Ended up going to London, freezing, having to buy a whole new wardrobe the whole time. And but we had a great time. But that's something that I would never get here in the States.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you don't look for those. Like, you don't, it's not to say that, like, oh, every experience can be made magical. Like, again, I'm not gonna sit here and say that because I'd be lying because then I'd go out and I would get stuck in traffic and then I'd be like, this freaking sucks. I wasn't expecting this. You know, I get it, but the more mindful you can be, and I think this goes back to mindfulness, the more mindful you can be and understanding like, hey, I'm gonna make something out of the situation, as opposed to, oh my goodness, it's a catastrophic event. Rethinking your thinking. It, I don't know how else to put it. And if you can make the most out of it, what are the alternatives, right? And I'm saying this because I ask myself this question all the time. All right, I'm stuck in traffic and I'm supposed to be there at 1:30. Now my ETA shows 1:40. I wasn't planning on this traffic. I'm going to be late. And I'm sitting there, and if folks who are familiar with Houston traffic's not fun. But I'm sitting in traffic, red headlights for as far as the eye can see. What are my options here? Am I going to, and I read this in a book, I forgot which book it was, but am I going to just get out of my car and start frantically kicking everybody else's cars because I'm just super angry and just complaining and making my life miserable, and in my case making my wife's life miserable by complaining the whole time? Or am I just going to take a deep breath and take it as, hey, I have an extra 10 minutes to listen to this podcast. Hey, I have an
Yeah.
extra 10 minutes to talk to my wife about something. Hey, I can practice my mindfulness techniques. This is the best time to do it. And again, please don't take it as like Pei and I are the embodiment of this mindfulness movement. We're not. Like, we struggle with it as well. But for us, talk, like you mentioned, right, with doing it, kind of talking about it with people, you then learn techniques or you re-emphasize your techniques. And it goes back to why you and I like to not mentor but help people. It redefines what we're doing, why we're doing it, right? I can't give somebody advice or feedback and then on the flip side not be following those same mechanics to myself. So by, although in somebody else's minds we might be 5 6 steps ahead, if you don't understand the basics, you can never continue to evolve. And reminding us from time to time, and maybe frequently, what the basics are grounds us, it humbles us, and that's very valuable.
Oh yeah. I spent all of last night up till almost midnight just redoing my plan.
Really.
Mhm.
Yeah. That there's something to be said about that. That no matter, and I think no matter what, I've mentioned this before, that there's never going to be this place in your life where you feel like I've arrived. So, if you use Google Maps and you're driving somewhere and you get to the place and Google Maps, like the route ends and it says you have arrived. I'm like, I've been searching for that moment, like in my life, where I have that feeling of like, hey, you've arrived. Everything you've been searching for this whole journey, you're there. And I've realized that that never comes. Truly, like that will never happen. And the sooner you can realize that, and the sooner you can accept that and learn to pivot, the better your life will be, because then you'll make the most out of, again, the journey of what you're doing. So it's hard
Hence the
though.
name of the podcast, Finding ing.
I'm glad you remember the name of our show.
I know. After 40 some odd episodes. What's my name again?
What's my name? Oh yeah, on our company's website this morning, we figured out you spelled your name incorrectly. So, but no, I mean, we're not trying to be doom and gloom with people, right? We don't want to get down on people and make people question, but I think this is part of just evolution and growing as a human being. And if you're not, somebody told me the other day, if you're not growing, what's life? And growing doesn't necessarily mean you're getting bigger stacks, you're getting more money, you're getting more possessions. Growing means as a person, emotionally, psychologically, maybe physically, maybe you're getting muscular. It's growing in those domains.
Mhm.
It's challenging your brain, and that can mean a plethora of things. And both having adequate wealth and a great basis of health allows you to do those things and to grow and become even better. So we want to share the realizations of what we are going through in real time, to give people at all stages, be it just starting out, have a few years under their belt, or even ahead of us, that it's normal to have these feelings and to have these thoughts and to have these.
And if anyone's ahead of us, please reach out. We would love to talk to you as well, because we have a lot to learn and we're still growing. So we would like to learn from others.
Yeah, there's always going to be somebody better than you, and we don't necessarily mean that in a financial sense, although that will be true. We mean that like in an emotional sense, and just in an overall place of life where they're just doing better, regardless of age. And that has nothing to do with age, although age does allow for greater experiences. But yeah, this has been a good one. Just very, I think, important. Just the timing of it all has been really good. I think we'll share a little bit more of our own experiences in the coming months of just what things that have actually happened, so you can see on numbers of, hey, here's what my projections were, had to stop, had to pivot, here are my new projections as a result. And we've done that multiple times. Like throughout our journeys, we've had to do that multiple times. It's just, we might tell each other, we might strategize with each other a little bit, or maybe our close community, but really, like, just opening the doors just allows people to see, like, oh, cool. Yeah. So any final thoughts?
No, I think it was good to, sometimes I feel this is like therapeutic for myself too, to be able to kind of unload. I'm sorry if we vomited on people today.
Deal with it.
Deal with it. What is it? I didn't choose the thug life. The thug life.
Oh my God. Enter meme here. and again, I appreciate everybody listening and willing to learn, willing to just be open about it, because this is, in my opinion, just as, if not more important than the strategy itself. Mm-hmm. I fully believe that. So once again, thank you everybody for tuning in. This has been a fun episode. Lots more to come, different topics. We'll start breaking down scenarios and concepts a little bit more in more detail, and we're on this journey. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming along, Pei.
Bye.